Hi, my name is Jérémie Cyr-Cooke. I am a physical performer, choreographer, movement director based in Galway, and I'm artistic director of Cuizle Productions, which is, I suppose, the new name. We just rebranded last week, but what used to be called Brickwall Theatre. And we celebrated our 5th year in existence in April, and this year was going to be our 5th year in the theatre festival, or 5th year in the theatre festival as well. So thanks for having me, Sarah.
Well, thank you very much. Congratulations on your fifth birthday. It's a strange time to be celebrating something like that, but still a great achievement nonetheless.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's so strange, and I think, I mean, we did what we could, and we're doing what we can, but yeah, we didn't do much about it.
Yeah,
Exactly. So it's all good.
And the rebrand, what prompted the rebrand?
Great question. So when I first created the company in 2015, I kind of just needed a name, really impromptu, and lo and behold, I was writing an application, and they're like, company name, and I was looking at a brick wall, so I called it Brickwall Theatre.
Excellent. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, and but also, like, there was implications of, like, oh, do you know when you hit a brick wall, and all of that, in terms of inspiration, and kind of that was trying me breaking through that wall. So since then, I mean, we've created 5 productions, or 4 full productions, and we've kind of fallen into, I say we, it's mainly me and a lot of collaborators. I'm not a megalomaniac, but so I'll talk in the I suppose. But yeah, so I kind of created a lot of physical theater stuff, and that's my main practice, or my main form of theater making is through physical theater. And I thought brick wall is very static for a name, and it's not at all, I don't know what the word connotes. It wasn't really in line with what the ethos and the aesthetic of the company was or is meant to be. So I kind of wanted something a bit more relative and in line with what we do, or what I do. So yeah, so I spoke with a few mentors and a few collaborators, and the name Cuizle was pitched, which is an Irish name or an Irish word for pulse, both in terms of, like, the movement of a pulsating movement, the pulse in terms of your heart, but also like metaphorically as the life of someone, the existence of something or someone. So I thought that was a really, really nice name. So we rebranded to Krishna Productions.
Great, good. Yeah, it's nice. It is. It does have much more, I suppose. It's much more alive. Obviously,
it is.
Pulse is much more alive than a brick wall. Do you know?
Yeah.
It is fitting. I think a fitting name.
I think, yeah, and a lot of the work that I do is very much, in my belief, is theater is about, like, having this visceral and this somatic experience for both the performers, but especially for the audience. And I'm really interested in that, the physicalness of the audience experience. The liveness and the aliveness of their experience as well. So yeah, I think it kind of shows. I've had a lot of people since kind of say, like, oh, how do you pronounce it? Is it Krishna Quizzle? And I'm like, definitely not Quizzle.
Definitely not Quizzle.
Brush up on your Irish, people.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's nice, and it's a fun, I suppose it's a fun thing to tell people, is how to pronounce it and
great.
All that. So
yeah, good. So Cuizle's first official production would have been Imperceptible in GTF. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So tell us about Imperceptible and what it would have been. Are you still, like, is it still part of your planning to present it at some point? And I suppose, what is Imperceptible?
So Imperceptible is a devised adaptation of a short horror story called, a French short horror story called Le Horla, which translates to the Horla, with an H, not like the Irish name, just not to get confused. And yeah, so the short story was first published in 1895, and it got 3 different iterations by the author, which I thought was really, really interesting. It started out as a short story called Letter from a Madman, and then became the Horla version 1, and then the Horla version 2. But yeah, it's about the story of a man's slow descent into madness, because he starts believing that there's a creature of sorts that lives in his house and feeds off of his existence and his livelihood, but he can't really see it, taste it, smell it. It's like it's an imperceptible creature, and that's where kind of the name came from. And I first read that short story, I think 6-7 years ago, and I really, really loved it. I'm a big fan of horror movies and everything gothic and dark, and yeah. So I kind of wanted to do an adaptation of it, and when I reread it again last year, I was like, oh yeah, this would be really great for theater. And um, this whole idea of like horror, like I said, I love this experience, this audience experience, and playing with the audience and forcing them to either make a decision, like I did in arbitration last year, or to judge. Like in Blood on the Moon, it was they had to judge whether or not the main character was guilty or not guilty of murder and all of that. So I thought this year I would try something different and really try and play with this horror aspect. And I love horror movies. In recently, there's like been a theme in horror movies that kind of go around the loss of senses, or the limitation of the senses. So like Bird Box, for example, where she can't see. Or that one with Emily Blunt and John Krasinski.
Quiet Place.
Thank you, A Quiet Place. It's not necessarily a loss of senses, but they can't make noise. And I think there's another one called Hush, where she is deaf, and then there's an intruder that comes into her house, and she can't necessarily, she has to fight him off. But I think that's just brilliant, and it heightens the experience, because you yourself, I mean, our 5 senses are there for a reason to help us survive. I mean, if we talk about the evolution of humans and mammals and the world, and yeah, this idea that if you cut off one sense, you're kind of more vulnerable to everything else. So I really wanted to play with that idea of like the physical senses and the touch and the sound and the presence of the sight as well of our senses, and I thought that would be a good way in. And in terms of Imperceptible, I was going to adapt it from a short story into a physical theater piece that had dialogue. So it was supposed to be a 2-man piece between myself and my collaborator called Connor Gormley, and it was set in a modern or contemporary Irish context, and it was much more of a look. When I was reading the story again and again, I felt there was like this weird draw to masculinity, and I wanted to embody this idea of masculinity and the effect that it has on mental health in young men in Ireland. So that's what it was supposed to be, I suppose. And in terms of whether I'm going to do it, so I'm still, it's kind of on the shelf at the moment, and I still definitely want to do it. I'm letting my brain, my subconscious work through different ways of doing it, with social distancing, because like I said, it was really about the playing with the senses, and I'm trying to figure out, is there a way that you can continue doing that through a live performance without necessarily having the audience present. So I'm in talks with myself about doing it either through a multi-camera setup in a theater where the audiences could have the choice to pick what way to look at it or what angle. So you have different cameras in the stage, or to have it a 360 camera placed in the center of the stage, and then you play around the 360. And during the live stream, they could scroll and play with binaural sounds, where you have 360 sounds. And so something you might be looking in one way on the camera, but something happens behind you. And so you have to like scroll or, heighten the experience.
Cool. It's an interesting kind of conceptualization of something that is so, like, physical theater is so, we understand it to be so relating to the body and being present and seeing and feeling very much physically. It's right there in the name, so the idea of like a 360 physical theater but live streamed digital, like, it's fantastically complex,
It is.
It is interesting though, because I think there'd also be a lot of scope for like a one person at a time kind of experience. Now that would be much more like maybe entering the quiet place, but the idea of kind of going through the process of losing and reconnecting and losing and reconnecting with your senses as you go along would be, there's a lot of scope in it. That's really exciting.
Thanks. Yeah. It's so weird, and I think I've been fighting since lockdown. I've been kind of fighting with myself and with the world in general, but like against this, like, oh no, you can't do physical theater digitally, and you can't do it socially distancedly, and but I think we don't have a choice, and I have. I can't not do theater. It is my livelihood. It's my Cuishla. So I think like I'll just have to think about a different way of doing it, and thinking about what if horror movies can give you that experience, that of your heart racing and your if you turn off all the lights and you're still scared, but that you are in your own space, technically safe in that space, then why can't theater do that as well? So I'm gonna toy around with that idea, but the plan is to have it presentable at least in the autumn.
Great. Cool. So I would like to talk about physical theater, because I have obviously seen you perform a number of times and you are incredible. And I love watching you perform, because it is something that is totally alien to me as something I could even imagine doing. And I find the skill and the talent in the physical theater that you present to be like, it's really, really impressive. So I have loads of questions. Well, I suppose one of them is like, why physical theater, and what draw you to that, and how did you get there?
Great. Okay, great question. So why physical theater? I'll start with that, I guess. I think so. It's actually a little bit weird as a process there. I'll start with this. I've always had a fascination for the body and movement, and since I was a kid, I wasn't much into sports. But I wasn't really into gymnastics, and I did like a couple of years of gymnastics, and then my mother decided to do her master's when I was a kid, so she kind of took the money from my gymnastics and put it in to her master's, which fair play to her, is fine. As an adult, I completely understand, and I kind of spent the rest of my childhood kind of self-teaching certain things. People who follow me on Instagram or on Facebook will know I have like an obsession with handstands, and I just do a lot of handstands everywhere. But I've always loved this idea of the moving body and acrobatics, and the big dream for me one day would be to work for Cirque du Soleil.
Cool.
And and I think through Cirque du Soleil, actually, I went to see one of their shows when I was quite young, and I saw like they have this entire storytelling aspect through circus acts, which I thought was phenomenal, and I really fell into the theater aspect and the act of storytelling and all of that to be really, really interesting. And then when I was in theater school and in actors training, a lot of my program was based on using the actor's body as the primary instrument for acting, and that kind of got me back into the physical aspect of performing, or the physical aspect of being. So it's no longer, it was much less about like, oh right, your backstory to the character and all of these things. It was much more like, how do they walk? How do they hold themselves? And then if they hold themselves, if they're hunched, what does that feel? Do you feel constraint? And then amplify that constraint within yourself. And so it's that psychophysical aspect of acting, which I quite liked. And going to see theater, I was much more interested in the visual aspect, much more than the intellectual aspect of the experience. And so I don't know, it just was a decision of like, this is what I want to do. And on top of that, I'm originally a French speaker, so it's my mother tongue, and I spent pretty much my entire life trying to lose my accent.
Why? No, don't.
Well, in performance, I mean, like,
I know.
in performance, you have, because I went to an English theater school. I went to French school all my life until I went to theater school. And in theater school, if I was going to be in English plays, I couldn't have a French Canadian accent and talk like this, and really, it wouldn't be taken seriously anyways. So I thought, but I found that I had a bit of talent in telling stories with my body instead. And for me, the physicality of storytelling is universal. It's a universal language. And I do consider it, physical theater, as a language of performance. And a lot of, in the various performances that I've done, I suppose I've had a lot of audience people come and talk to me afterwards and be like, I'm not an English speaker. I didn't quite fully understand the text, but I knew exactly what was going on throughout the entire piece because of the physicality, whether it was mime or clown or a much more movement based. They always had a sense of what was going on. And for me, that's what the beauty of physical theater is that it creates a somatic response that is much deeper for the audience, and that they can understand, and they can be changed and transcended to another whole other level, in my opinion. So yeah.
Cool. So how would you, if you can, define physical theater? I'm sure you're asked this question sometimes, but I know I've been asked, and I struggle with a kind of concise definition because it incorporates so much possibility.
That's such a good question, and I don't necessarily have a specific answer for you. I mean, I'm on a lifelong quest to try and characterize or define physical theater. I think in its simplest form is physical theater is a form of theater that uses the body as a prime communicator in storytelling. It's very academic, but not really. But like, so it's looking where the body is just, there's much more of a focus on the body, much more so than the inner emotive or inner emotions of the actor in the performance. And I think that's what kind of physical theater is in its simplest form, but it encompasses a whole lot of different practices in a contemporary context where we use the term, right? So we have, a mime-based show could be called a physical theater production, or a dance piece that has a very clear narrative could also be called physical theater. Yet to mime and dance are like somewhat different in technique and practices and stylization of the body. So I think I'm also on that quest of like what it does, but the way that I perceive physical theater is that it's a way that you stylize the body to tell a story, and you use the body to tell the story, and you don't just stand there, but you add choreography, which is only one aspect of physical theater, or you add gestures or movement or whatever it is that you want to add. But like technically all theater is physical, because you'll always need live bodies for theater to be theater.
Which is part of the conundrum that we're having.
It so is. And you know, I did my master's in this, and like one of the books that I read was called Physical Theater: A Critical Introduction, and pretty much the authors kind of came at it from is all theater physical? Well, yes, it is, because you need audience members to be there, and you need actors to be there, and even a radio play technically is physical theater, because or is needs a physical aspect of the theater, because they need the actors to be in the studio in that space saying those words at that specific moment in time, and you need the audience to be in that space listening to the radio play. Like, do you know what I mean? It can get like very theoretical, but yeah.
Something you mentioned at the beginning was the audience, and that you like kind of playing with the audience. I was following you on Instagram over the kind of the March April period, where you were posting the little love stories from the piece from 2018, which was lovely, because I remember being in the audience and having to like fill that in. It was a really good way of like bringing me back into that point and into the play, which was really nice. But you know, you mentioned the importance of the liveness of the audience. How do you kind of come at that when you're crafting a production? How do you think about pulling an audience in?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think so. I think it depends on the show, to be honest. So when I self-direct, like I did with Blood on the Moon and Arbitration last year, there's a certain aspect of like the performativity of and the feeling of performance, which I lack in a studio when I'm by myself. I love just having interactions with the audience, which we did have in the Messiness, the show you're referring to from 2018. To me, it's that conversation. It doesn't need to be like spoken conversation, but it's that conversation of playing with the audience. Because when you're an audience member, you know, you kind of expect to just sit there and watch the show and experience it, and you open yourself up to that world, and you're vulnerable. And when suddenly you have an actor kind of forcing you to make a decision or to play with them in any shape or form, to me, that's where the true humanity and the true play of theater happens. So, for example, in Arbitration, in the original script, when I read the original script, the playwright Niall Carmody, who's a good friend of mine, had already made the decision whether or not the actor was, or the character was going to live or not. And then I kind of just said, oh no, I'm missing some audience thing. I don't want just the audience to be there and look through the looking glass kind of thing and see what Alan is going through, blah, blah, blah. And I talked to him about it, and he said, yeah, okay. And I said, oh, what if? There's a lot of what ifs in my process. My poor designer, every time, every year I'll be like, hey, can you, like, what if we had like a coffin that looked like a camera? Or make me a table that looks like a book. I don't know. So, but yeah, and I was like, oh, what if the audience gets to choose? You know, what is that process like? Because I think it kind of, there's a bit of a pedagogy. Part of another passion of mine is education and pedagogy and all that stuff. And I think I do theater to try and change or make people experience something and open their minds to a new world or new thoughts or something like that. And in that process of learning as an audience member, it has to be experiential. So for them to be more engaged with the story, I feel like they need to have a bit of touch to it, and make that decision, I suppose, or to share a story in that given space. So with the Messiness, it was about sharing their first kiss stories live in front of everyone, and it was absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite moments in all of my performance history was those every night we had different people sharing their first kiss stories. I also had, just in case no one wanted to share, I had them written down, which I eventually shared, like you said, in March. But you know, I had one woman who was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. She said she had never been kissed before. And I thought that was like, wow, for her to feel safe
Yeah.
and to feel good enough about herself to share that, which
Mhm.
to some people might be embarrassing or shameful or whatever it is, like for her to be vulnerable enough to share that in front of an audience of 68 people, and the actors
Yeah.
and a clown character who's like right in your face. So no, that was fantastic. And so yeah, it depends. I think it depends on the show. But I always, when I first create or come up with the ideas of a show that I want to work on, I always try to imagine what the audience is going to experience,
Mm.
and looking at it from an outside point of view while you're performing. It's a bit of like you split your mind in
Yeah.
half. But then seeing and having those two halves communicate and seeing like, oh, what would the audience love to feel at this moment, or something like that. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's amazing to kind of, there are so many plays that I remember being so drawn into the performance of it that I do feel it somewhere physically in my body, and my brain is elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I've been doing part of my kind of keeping myself sane activities over the past couple of weeks was I've saved all of the theatre tickets for all of the plays I've been to since 2018. They were all
Wow.
just in a big pile, so I put them into an archive. And I was like writing little notes about all the plays the things that I can remember. And there somewhere, just reading the name of the play, I was transported right back to the auditorium, and I could feel all of the feelings that I had when I was in the play, like watching the play, being part of it all, which is so, sounds completely bizarre and not possible, but I know it is possible because it has happened, and
Yeah.
that's the power of it, that it not only transports you for the 45 to hour and a half long kind of space of time that you're there, but then you bring it with you. It's kind of stored somewhere in
Hmm.
your memory and in your body, and it just kind of appears when with looking at the ticket or being reminded of the play or talking about it again, it all just kind of comes back up again, um which is so important and powerful, and I think it goes back to the idea of the liveness and the aliveness that you were talking about of the audience, that there is no real passivity. It seems passive sitting in an audience,
Yeah.
but you're constantly soaking up everything that you're being given and interpreting and reinterpreting it, that it's not possible to be a passive audience member, I don't think. Now obviously I'm biased, but I don't think passivity is something that we are actually allowed to do by the actors when you go to an auditorium, to a play, or sit in an
Yeah.
auditorium, or are in a circus top, or wherever you are, it drags you in.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would have to say, like, when done right, you're correct. And
Yeah.
it could be that, like, the shows that you did go to see were done right and they didn't allow you. Now, I have been to shows where I was just bored out of my mind. But even then, it's not necessarily a passive thing. Now I'm being
Yeah.
bored in that space and I'm kind of forcing myself to engage with what's going on. Because there's, like, this whole expectation. Yeah, right. Like, this an audience experience, I think, is like a new area of
Mhm.
research in the past couple of years as well, which is interesting. Um, and I love that as well. But yeah, I think you have this expectation of, like, you're sitting and you're engaging, but you've made the decision to go to that show,
Mhm. Well, that's
right?
true.
And you
Yeah.
spent money on that ticket, most likely. So, so yeah, might as well enjoy it while you're there. Like,
Yeah, and I have definitely been to plays that are not as good, or don't have the power to do that. But I think I kind of would be loath to say that any play that I've been to, even the ones that I really didn't enjoy, that there's no play that I feel was a waste of my time,
mm,
because there's always something that I take with it, even if it's what I don't like and what not to do.
yeah, no, actually, you're right. You're
I never
absolutely
want to
right.
see again. I know it always is informing my practice as a theatre practitioner, but also my taste as a theatre audience member.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right there. And even the ones where I was bored, I would leave the theater and be like, why was I bored?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't like that. Right. Okay. So I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, thankfully they're not. I mean, we have some fantastic theater companies in Galway,
And
especially.
in
But
fairness, there those plays are few and far between.
yeah.
In the however many I've been to since 2019, there's very few where I either didn't keep the ticket or couldn't remember it. I think there was one that I lost the ticket, and another one that I can't remember anything about it. But other than that, all of them carry something. They all leave something behind.
Yeah, and even like in terms of inspiration, I mean, a book that changed my life, which was on the on the curriculum in my actor training program, which is called Steal Like an Artist. Brilliant, small book by an artist called Austin Kleon, who himself, his art is that he takes newspaper articles and blacks them out and
Oh,
leaves
cool.
certain words and creates kind of poems out of the words from that article. And he writes about, yes, steal like an artist, and it's not necessarily that all artists steal, but is that you can take from so many different inspiration. And I think like going to the theater, no matter what, like you're saying, does do that to you. And inspiration can be both a negative experience in terms of, I didn't enjoy that. So it's inspiring in the sense of like, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to do better.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, so I think it's a fascinating book. Do read it.
Give me
Whoever's
the
watching
name of
this
it
video.
again so I can make
It's
sure.
called Steal Like an Artist.
Yeah. By
Austin Kleon, Kleon.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds, because I do think that no matter what you're doing, there's always scope for kind of, I feel like artists are like sponges. You just kind of soak everything up, and then you're not entirely sure when or where it's going to come back out again, but it's there, floating around in the background.
Totally. Totally. And it is like to take someone else's work or to take something else that's happened and just transforming it into something completely new and different, I think. And part of it, like Imperceptible is that ultimately, because I'm taking well, I don't know if it's famous, but like I'm taking a short story and I'm transforming it into a physical experience. So something that you would experience by reading it, and it is like you have, especially the original French text has that thrilling aspect of it being supernatural and the horror aspect, which kind of got lost in the translation. But then you transpose that into a physical theater piece, I feel like that's, you experience it in a whole new different way. And that's what I love about adaptation. I saw last week I watched the Old Vic's adaptation of A Monster Call, which is one of my all-time favorite books. But yeah, I experienced it again a whole new different way, and I was like, wow, this is cool, because it was part physical theater, but also you have the story line, which is very effective. And so, seeing an actor do like a movement like this, you kind of get the, oh my God, that reaction inside of you, which you don't get when you read it about whatever aspect it was. So I thought it was,
Cool. Yeah, that kind of neatly brought us back around to Imperceptible, which we started with. I have to admit, I'm not a fan of horror, but I was very much looking forward to seeing the piece, and I'm excited to see what you'll come up with in terms of bringing the physical and the digital into the same kind of realm. There's a lot of really exciting scope there.
Yeah, it's I think so, and I hope so. And the piece was always kind of meant to have a bit of a technological aspect to it, especially in terms of sound and lighting or lack thereof. Wink, wink. But yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. And in terms of like the horror, it wasn't. I love to go see a show, no matter what the narrative is, and you're on the edge of your seat at all times. It doesn't have to be a horror for that to happen. It can be just the atmosphere of two lovers who can't see each other, like Romeo and Juliet, if done right. Or it can be about someone going through a tormented memory or whatever it is, or like a sex scene, and like being on the edge of your seat and be like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And I love that. And I wanted that to bring that in through this idea of like the sound. And there was going to be, I suppose, and you have the material to share, but like there's the design. If you look at the design aspects, there was a lot of like this projections and mirrors. The mirrors in water make a huge part of themes that occur in the original story, which were part of what I wanted to keep with in the adaptation. So there were going to be 3 different mirrors, and I wanted to play with this idea of the mirrors and the reflection, that the audience can not only see themselves but also see the back of the actor, or if the actor is back to the audience, that he can see the audience in the mirrors and they can see him through that reflection as well. And then you also had the creature that was an embodiment, which was inspired by an embodiment of masculinity, but it was it was a masked character, and the mask was going to be shattered glass. And play with the audience and have that moment of like being in your face in the audience, but that, if you look at the creature, you're not only looking at the creature, you're also looking at your reflection of the mirror that happens in your face. And so like, what is that relationship like? It's all metaphors and symbols and stuff like that. But
yeah, it's exciting. I like it. I can really kind of already feel the kind of tension and the being really gripped by everything. So I'm excited for when it materializes.
Me too.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you perform again, hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers.
Keep safe.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks so much, Sarka. And thanks everyone for watching. And check out our space on Facebook and Instagram.